the old world is dying and the new world can't yet be born. Now is the time of monsters. And I feel like we're living in kind of that moment, in the sense that the old is dying, but nothing new is, and really nothing better is able to take its place. And so we're just living with the kind of monstrosities of these changes happening and creating conflict, but without any alternative.
This is the future.
Hello and welcome to the Alternate Futures podcast, where we chat with indie sci-fi creators about their work, the world, and anything in between, or beyond. Today I'm here with Shawn Whitney. Shawn is an award-winning screenwriter with 3 feature film credits and several TV series in development internationally. He's ghostwritten more than a dozen books and has 9 novels published under his own name. Shawn writes subversive fantastical fiction with a pulp vibe. His latest book is Dead's Rise, subtitled What If Zombies Are the Heroes? Hi, Shawn. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Edmund.
So I got to ask, since I don't get a lot of Canadians on this show, and you are Canadian, you on one of your bios, you list yourself as a Canadian-born genre vagabond and political radical. I don't know if that's still true, but do you follow Canadian politics much anymore?
It's a little embarrassing, but Canadian politics is generally so boring, at least English Canadian politics, that I tend to be more likely to follow American politics or even Spanish politics these days.
Yeah, I guess those are the exciting ones. Although Trudeau's been doing his best to keep things lively, I think.
Yes, yes. Yeah, things seem to have kind of heated up there. It looks like there's going to be an election pretty soon.
Yeah.
So,
I'm curious. So you told me before we started that you're now living in Spain. How long have you been living there then?
we came here about 9 years ago. It was just 9 years, actually, like 2 weeks ago. So
Okay.
we've been here a while.
So you probably like me then. Do you go back very often? Because I don't go back very often, and I can't vote in the elections, for example. So
I think I can vote in the elections. I can't remember now. I guess I'll find out soon enough. But we don't go back that often. I have 2 daughters and my partner, my wife. So for 4 people to travel back to Canada, especially during holidays when people are around, either the summers or Christmas time, is just outrageously expensive. So we haven't been back in 2 years, I think.
yeah, that's not too bad. Yeah, we're planning a trip back this year, but yeah, generally don't get back very often. Like you say, and if you don't live in the main cities or have family in the main cities, it becomes even more challenging, doesn't it? And more expensive.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Granada has an airport that flies to some locations internationally, like Paris, like within Europe. But to get to North America, we would have to go either to Malaga, which is about an hour and a half drive, or we would have to go up to Madrid, which is about 5 hours on the bus.
Wow, geez, so that adds a lot of time to your journey as well, I imagine.
Yes, yeah.
So you're before we get into the writing part, well, the novel writing part, you're a filmmaker as well, so you have author credits and maybe a variety of other credits on films. So what's that process like? How long have you been involved in that?
Wow. So yeah, I mean, I have maybe one of the weirder careers in writing of anybody I've met. So I started off writing kind of propaganda, I guess, like activist propaganda. And then went back to my first love, which was writing fiction. And I had a theater company in the early 2000s that was kind of, or the late 90s, early 2000s. And then I decided that there was no future in theater. And so I went and I started to write novels and wrote some really bad novels, which I have on my shelf as kind of moral lessons to my daughters. Be like, see, this is how you fail, and you keep on going even when you fail, and that's the only use of that book, which is a terrible book.
Right.
And so I got into screenwriting, and I got into the Canadian Film Center in 2007, I guess it was, and got a job. Wrote this like completely crazy screenplay that was completely unmarketable, it had no commercial potential at all. But it actually got me my job, which I had for about 15 years in development, working as a creative development executive. So that was kind of my road in, and then I wrote some stuff like one I directed and wrote a couple of films, and then I had another film that was a made for TV movie that got made, and then some TV series that are kind of in the development phase.
So you still do movies and films of various types.
Much less so. It's really hard to. I think the thing with film is that it's hard to get anything made. So you write things, and people make their whole careers writing scripts that never get made because they'll get optioned. They'll get the option will get exercised. So they can make, if your option is exercised on a script or your TV series is picked up, you could make 30, 50,000 dollars and it still doesn't get made. So there's people I know who've made a living not getting things made. And so you write these screenplays and you can spend a lot of time. And I have some screenplays that I really love that really moved me, the stories, and they've been read by, 10 people. So I'm doing that much less now. When the writer's strike happens a year and a half ago, I guess, I lost my long-term gig with a production company because everything was just going belly up. And that kind of forced me to focus more fully on just novel writing as well as content writing.
Right. I mean that's such a strange industry the more I hear about it. I mean how do you compare that to the world of writing for novels, for example?
So writing novels is kind of funny because there's many paths. There's many ways to skin a cat, So I think that the standard model that people have in their head, like the standard cosmological model, is the Big Bang theory. It's like you have this book, you write this great book, some publisher or agent read your book, and it blows up, and you're a best-selling author. And people expect that to happen, and it almost never happens. And if
Right.
people get published, what ends up happening is that they publish a book once every 5 years, maybe, and it's a very difficult path, I think, to follow for people, and it tends to be a small group of people who make it in that path. And what has become more common, I think, is the path that I followed, which was to go into ghostwriting, into kind of novel mill writing, as it's called, I think, sort of disparagingly, and that actually generates a regular income and allows you to live and to write. And so that's the path that I've gone down anyway.
Yeah, I've known a few ghostwriters. I'm always interested to talk about their experience. Um, like how does, well, I guess you can get into ghostwriting. I suppose you really love writing and you just sort of put your name out. But how does the process differ from novel writing for yourself? And then, I mean, which do you prefer for whatever reason?
It depends on the day in some ways, or what I'm writing. I was saying to my wife actually, it's kind of harder for me to write my own stuff now because it's like you're like a trained hamster, right? So you are assigned a project, and I've got a really good client slash publisher with whom I worked, and he will assign something, and he gives me sort of a general assignment. We want something in this genre with these elements to it. I'll develop a one sheet, like a one pager. He'll approve it, maybe have some notes. I'll then expand that out to a chapter outline and a world building document. I'll get some more notes on that, and then I'll go and I'll write, and then I'm paid by the word. So there's a very strong incentive to be Dickensian. I mean, that's how Charles
Exactly.
Dickens is paid, right? I'm maybe not at the skill level of Charles Dickens, but I'm trying to produce a certain number of words per week, and so there's not a lot of room for self doubt. You just got to do it because you got to pay the bills. Whereas you're writing your own stuff, I find it much harder to stay focused. To Until I get into it, it's harder to get into the process. So it's a bigger struggle. And maybe I'm also a little bit more like you're also self-doubting and like worried about, am I conveying in the precise way that I want to, the story that I want to convey, the moments, whatever. Whereas you're writing to the word, you're just like, just get it out. You're much less
Right.
upset
With
about it.
with the ghostwriting, there's a lot of feedback with the person you're writing for, presumably as well. Is that true? Or is it just
Yeah, it really depends. I've had a few different experiences. Sometimes the process is extremely industrialized. On one occasion, I wrote a book that was basically lizard porn. It was this interspecies erotica with lizard warrior men who were well endowed, who kidnapped human women from planets, and we needed them to reproduce because all the women on their own planet had died. And so I had to write the book, but the book had multiple stages and people for each stage. It really was kind of tailorist in the sense that there was a person who came up with who developed concepts and one pagers, and then there was a person who was like an outliner who developed the chapter outlines, and then I was the writer, and then there was an editor who did like substantive editing, and then there was another editor after that who would do proofreading, and then there was various other people in the marketing end on it. So there was like just in the production there was 6 people or something, and that was kind of I didn't really like that much. In some ways, it's harder to do it the way that I've been doing it for the last few years, which is I work with one client, they tell me what they want, I develop it. And then I write it. And so it's all through me and with them, though, giving constant feedback. And because I'm paid by the word, I submit on a weekly basis and they pay me on a weekly basis.
Oh, okay.
A regular job, which I appreciate, but it means I'm getting feedback on the regular as well, which is actually quite useful because by the time you get to a book, often you've forgotten. Not completely, but it's harder to go back in the same kind of level of detail. So you're editing. So I tend to write in 10,000 word blocks. I'll write 10,000 words and then I go back, I revise those 10,000 words and then I move on to the next 10,000 words and do the same.
Yeah, because first of all, it's very strange that adult fiction you're writing. I would not have expected that particular genre to have such a industrial process behind it. That's the kind of thing you think some strange person in their bedroom just decided they want to have a book of this at some point. But yeah, I was wondering, so sometimes when I'm writing, I would like to have feedback on guidance on, is this working? And I have been in writing groups, but it hasn't sort of worked to that level. Like it's usually way behind where I'm actually at the writing stage of. So, have you built that into your novel writing? Because I was wondering if that's something maybe that with the ghostwriting that helps you get it on a sort of consistent pacing versus your own stuff. And I don't know maybe whether you have feedback on your own stuff or not.
No, I have feedback at the end. I get feedback on my own stuff from various people, but not generally during the process. I'd like to get that actually. I do find it useful. And even now, my client for whom I work, he's had different editors over the last few years, and some have been more interventionist than others and have given me more detailed notes. And there was a guy he had a couple of years ago, I don't know what happened to him, but he like really knew the genre I was writing in much better than I did actually. Because it was, you get into some of those niche genres, niche subgenres in say science fiction that are like cultivation fantasies and progression fantasies, and they have very specific rules and expectations by readers. And if you don't follow those rules, people get really angry. And so he knew those rules, and he would be like, "Okay, you need to do this. This is good. You need to do this." And I would go back and I would fix it, and that was very helpful. And so, yeah, I really appreciate that.
Right. It's interesting you mentioned that because you have co-authored some progression, what are they called? Progression fantasy novels with D.B. King. Is that the right name?
Yeah, that's correct.
What was that like, and what exactly is a progression fantasy then?
It's basically kind of like a video game. Like it's they go through. You need to kind of know the levels. I'm not super good at it. D.B. King is more the pro than I am, but basically, like with not Bone Mage, which means the name Lost Mages. Basically, I drew up a progression chart where the Bone Mages, which was the title of the magic users in that series, they had certain progressions depending on the type of Bone Mage they were, and as they became more proficient, then they were given more powers as a result. And then they were given names and so on. And so it was kind of like if you play Dungeons and Dragons or if you play video games, you would get that kind of vibe.
Right, that's interesting because it's the first time I've heard it. So I've heard it called lit RPG or game lit. It's the first time I've heard it called progression fantasy. So that's interesting.
Well, yeah, and lit RPG is different, right? Like it's changed. It was originally like Ready Player One was lit RPG. fantasy. There's a bunch of them where you're kind of like you're in the video game and the video game becomes real. So it's like it's a literary role-playing game kind of thing. It's changed somewhat over the years. I don't think it's exactly like that Ready Player One vibe anymore. Um, but it still falls under that. And then there are all these sub like cultivation fantasies like progression, but it's much more akin to Japanese style progression that has a lot to do with martial arts and stuff. I don't know very much about cultivation. I think it's called cultivation, but it's like its own whole school of thing, and people are very specific about it.
That's good to know. I didn't realize there were so many subgenres of
Holy
that
cow!
subgenre.
Yeah, yeah, that stuff it didn't exist when I was a kid. You
Yeah,
read the
exactly.
classics. Larry Niven, Robert Heinlein, Ursula K. Le Guin. Again, they're just like jumping all over the place. One time it's a space opera, next time it's first contact story, whatever takes them in the moment, they go with. But now people will tend to write. In fact, I was reading I read these blogs, people like marketing authors who are doing marketing, and there's Facebook groups and stuff. And this guy talking about his method for marketing Facebook. Might be kind of interesting. But what was maybe most interesting was he had written in his world that he had created, this universe, he had written 135 books. I mean, the level of specialization, I can't even imagine. I was bored just thinking about writing 135 books. I can't imagine being at book number 135 in whatever universe I could dream up, and I'd want to be there still. But the people do.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Yeah. So I mean, you have authored quite a number of books and co-authored as well as the movies, but what was it that initially, I mean, you seem to have started in film, but I mean, what was it inspired you to write in general then in the first place?
I think I'm one of those weird people who I just always knew I was a writer from like age 10 or 11, and just thought of myself as a writer over the years. And so I wrote, so I bounced around. I wrote things like I can remember I would go to my grandparents in the summertime when I was a kid, and I can remember they had an old uh, typewriter. It was like not even electric; it was just a typewriter, and very slowly typing like a science fiction story. And I think I got up to page 12 or 15 on legal size paper, and they were all kind of like minds blown that I managed to write that many words one place. And I was very young. I did that. So I just have always, and I've kind of denied it a few times, tried to resist that in myself because there's no money in it, it's hard to make a living. But I've always come back to it. Like, I think I'm just kind of useless at everything else. So I have to be a writer.
Yeah, okay.
It's that or cooking worms.
So when you started, well, when you shouldn't say started, when you finished your first novel, for example, did you try to, or did you think about going the traditional publishing path, or have you always been interested in indie publishing?
My first novel when I wrote it many years ago, the bad novel that's on my bookshelf. And it was kind of, a typical first novel. It was fairly autobiographical, and it was called Trish and Jelly. That was the name of the characters and the name of the book. And it was kind of a love story. And I wrote it, and it was huge. It was like, I don't know, 400 pages, which seemed, it was looked massive to me. And I took it to somebody had introduced, a writer friend of mine introduced me to a publisher. I took them the book. They got it. They commented on how thick it was and said, "Yeah, we're not interested. That's too big." Um, and that was kind of it. And so I kind of gave up on prose writing at that point. I'm not even sure what year that was. I would have been 2005, maybe. Um, and just thought, okay, I could never get anything produced. And it was before, Amazon was around, but it was before there was Kindle. So
Right.
there was no ebook world. There was no indie publishing. So people, when they published independently, it was a shameful thing to do, like it was the self-publishing, it was vanity publishing. They called it back then. It was not a lucrative market. So I didn't come back around to it until I ended up being a ghostwriter. And then I realized that whole world existed. I had no idea.
Right. And so you weren't interested anymore after that experience, because you have your newest one is self-published, is that right? The Dead's
That's
Rise.
correct. Yeah, yeah.
Right. Okay. Um, When was it that you published your first novel then, co-written or otherwise?
I guess it was 3 years ago, 4 years ago. I'm not sure. I mean, I started writing ghostwriting maybe 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, just to kind of to make extra money actually, because the development executive gig in the film industry was not paying, and I felt like it was going to come to an end. I, I think I predicted that correctly, prematurely, because I continued at it for a few more years. And I was like, I need to make some extra money. And so I just kind of stumbled upon ghostwriting, to be totally honest with you. And these guys had posted that they wanted somebody to work on a series on Upwork, on a freelance platform. And they were paying 2 cents a word, I think. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna give this a try. So I started writing.
Excellent. So, but 5 years, I mean, it sounds like you've been writing quite a lot during that time then, if you've published some of your own work as well as all the ghostwritten stuff. What's your sort of daily routine like then?
So when I'm in a book, I mean, I tend to write about 20,000 words a week when I'm working on contracts, 20 to 25, and I will. But it took me a while to get up to that. I didn't just like step into 20,000 words a week. It's been a while, but that will be like I'll try to do it in 3 days, and I'll do like a Monday. I'll start my morning. I'll come downstairs. I'll drink my coffee and stand. I have like a treadmill desk, and I'll stand at my desk and look at my screen, and I'll ponder it for a little while, and then I get into it and I walk for whatever, and I'll those 2 days, the 2.5 days, 3 days, I will write until I go to bed, basically. I'll stop to like have meals with my family. I'll drive my daughter to soccer, but while I'm waiting for her, while she's at soccer, I'm writing, and then I come home with her, and then I'm writing till I go to bed, in order to get it done and edit it so that I can send it off.
Wow. That's pretty impressive. Do you have a fitness routine then to keep yourself from getting all cramped up at the desk or anything? Or is it just the walking desk?
It's just a walking desk, and that's made a huge difference. I had sciatica, and I
Oh,
had a couple of years ago, not a couple of years ago now. I guess it's probably about 8 years ago now. I had a sciatica attack, and I couldn't walk for a month. I had to like crawl around my house. It was the most pain I've ever been in my life, and I was working then just at my desk all the time. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. So shortly thereafter, after I recovered, I sort of just working standing up. Um, and that still hurts my back. But if I'm walking, it's tiring, but I'm moving my body, and so you're just keeping all those kind of core muscles activated, and that's made a huge difference.
right. Yeah. So I mean, you ghostwrite and you write for yourself. Obviously, when you ghostwrite, well, presumably when you ghostwrite, you don't have to worry about the marketing. How have you found the marketing with regards to your own work? What kind of challenges have you found there, and have you managed to overcome them?
Well, I hadn't totally. It's a steep learning curve, and there's a lot to learn, and there's so many platforms. It's kind of an overwhelming amount of information. I mean, if you think about marketing, there's or advertising, there's Facebook ads, there's Amazon ads, there's BookBub ads. Um, there's TikTok, which is a huge thing for some people. Some people do only TikTok. I mean, I expect they won't be after January 19th in the United States anyway. That's
Yeah,
going
yeah.
to come to a abrupt end. Um, and then there's a whole other layer of things with like deal sites. Deal sites are a huge part of marketing. BookBub being one of them, but there's a bunch of them. Book Barbarian, Fussy Librarian, I think was another one. There's a bunch of ones. Some of them are scammy kind of sites. Other ones are better. You got to and I've learned a lot with the first book how to do it wrong more than I've learned how to do it right. I've learned from doing it wrong, but I'm still figuring out how to do it right in a way that can make a really sustainable living. Like I'm not giving up ghostwriting yet.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it does take a while, doesn't it? Have you been then working on a email list? Is that sort of one of the things, or have you been focusing on socials more?
Yeah, so I have been working on emails. I need to send out an email to my newsletter actually. Um, but what I did for that was in November, I guess it was, I started to advertise. Once I did the initial push with the book and got the book out there. In fact, so what I did was I did a bunch of deal sites like free deals. You do like a 5-day free thing on Amazon you can do. And I did that, and something like 5,000 people downloaded my book. But what do I get out of that? People download your book. Do they even read it? Almost none of them review it. It's kind of, maybe you'll get read through, but I didn't have a second book. My second book wasn't done at that point. It's now done, but in editing. So there was no like immediate payoff to that. So it was kind of dumb. So
Hmm.
a warning to anybody who's listening, wait till you have a second book before you spend money on that kind of deal site sort of vibe. But it occurred to me, it was like, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to spend money on this. I should just have spent the money on Facebook advertising with a lead magnet, offering the book for free for people who sign up for my email list. And that was pretty successful until we hit Black Friday and then Christmas time. And then people are just saturated with advertising. So it's
Right.
kind of became pointless. People were not going to sign up for anything. But for while it worked really well. So I'll probably go back to that actually.
Excellent. Yeah. So you have a lead magnet on your website, or where do you offer it from right now?
At the moment, I'm not offering it. At the moment, I'm not really doing much advertising. I wanted to kind of hold back until book two is ready. So I'm prepping some ads for Amazon to kick off, and then when the book launches, I'll advertise book one again to try to get read through to book two. And I'll probably try to get I'll probably do some more deal sites and try to get a BookBub feature deal. See if that's possible.
Right. So this is a good time to move on to your book then, which is called Dead's Rise: What If Zombies Are the Heroes? You have it in the blurb that it reached number one Amazon bestseller in multiple categories, top 100 free books on Amazon. Um, what was that like then, and which categories did it reach?
It reached, oh my gosh, I've I've forgotten the name of it. It's sort of an odd name. It was metaphysical, it's science fiction, metaphysical, uh, and philosophical science fiction. And it also reached number one in, I'm going to say, young adult zombie books, briefly. Um, and with Amazon, there's a big churn, so they don't want you in number one for very long. So I lasted there for about a week, and then I was bumped by somebody else. The person who had been in number one. It's sort of funny. People pay really close attention to it because it's useful as social proof. So the book that had been in number one, I bumped them to number two, and that lasted for a while. And then they obviously noticed, and they were like, "Wow, what's going on? I need to put some money in marketing." And so suddenly they jumped back up to number one.
Right. The competition among some indies, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
the death battle.
Yeah, yeah. So this is an interesting book. Okay, so I'll try and I guess briefly summarize it. I don't want to give any spoilers, so usually I do ask the author to summarize it. But so essentially what happens is everyone between the age of 13 and 45 falls down effectively dead, and then they get back up seemingly with no issues except they don't have any vital signs basically. And then the story carries on from there with the effects of like the social effects and everything that's going on. Is there anything you wanted to add to that sort of very brief summary?
No, I think that's a pretty good brief summary. Actually, that's basically, yeah. There become zombies. That's the cultural reference point, I think, for everybody in the book world of what's happened to them.
They do dispute the term zombie throughout the book, though, with good
Yeah,
reason, I think. Yeah. Um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, exactly. So, first, I guess I wanted to know, this is obviously well, it feels like I'd call a near future story. Did you have a timeline envisioned on that, or a date, kind of a year when more or less this was happening?
I thought of it as being like 20 years in the future, kind of thing.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that seems about right. Yeah. Um, before we get into the really most interesting stuff. I was really happy at the near the beginning because you're almost the only person that I've heard discussing self-driving cars, and it wasn't a big part. It's not a big part of the story at all. It's a small bit in the near the beginning, but you are the only other person that I know of who's discussed self-driving cars in a non-standard car type structure, and I was quite excited to read that because that's one of my things since talk of self-driving cars is the notion that they don't need to remain like cars on the inside anymore. So what were your thoughts on that, and how did you maybe you can take it from there and sort of expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have thought the same thing too, that at a certain point, there's no reason to have them structured with everybody facing forward, your back to the person behind you, which seems sort of rude. It's unnecessary and you don't need a steering wheel. So it would be cars in the future would be more like living rooms in some ways. But also there would just be more variety in terms of functionality of what the purpose of the car is, and that will change how people's arrangement is within it. So that was that whole, like, I think there's a comment. She talks about her father used to make jokes about what people were doing in the cars because of course they would have couches and stuff, but they would be blacked out. So he'd be like, "Oh, that's people in that car are having sex. The people in that car." So it would be like a little game between the father and daughter.
Yeah, no, I find that interesting to think about as well because, like you said, there wouldn't be a need for steering wheels, and in fact, I think having a steering wheel in a self-driving car would be greatly discouraged, at least for insurance purposes, right? As soon as the human takes over, all the insurance rates go up through the roof, probably. So,
Yeah, yeah, you probably got a warning.
yeah,
The
exactly. Are
insurance
you
gets
sure you want to
doubled.
do this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, because I love the idea of you know, living rooms for the family car or offices, little portable offices if you're commuting to work or something. Yeah. And yeah, like I said, I think you're the only other person that I've come across so far that's and maybe I'm not really widely read, but you are the only person that I've seen discussing this. So I was quite happy with that. I was also quite happy that you did go a bit more into the zombie part than usual. So one of my pet peeves in zombie stories is, and maybe I get hung up on this for no reason, because I know that zombies are kind of a plot device to address other issues, but it always bothers me that you've got like this decaying husk that moves around and is, how does the metabolism work if it doesn't need to breathe, etc., if it doesn't really eat or if it only eats its brains. And you
Yeah.
did go into that. That was sort of a key part. I mean, in the first book, at least, it's addressed, but they don't know what's happening. So it's not, so we don't understand fully what it is yet. And I don't want to give spoilers, but I do like that you spent a lot of time doing that. I'm sure it was very intentional. Maybe you could walk us through non-spoiler version of your zombie design.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was thinking the same thing, and then in fact, the only other zombie story I can think of where they sort of deal with it is the Last of Us. If I got that title right. Um, which is I really love the TV series, and where they're taken over by those parasitic fungi, and so the fungi basically animate the body, which comes from those bug fungi that take over the bodies of like ants and stuff, and then get them to climb up into the sunlight and then turn into the fungus. And so they use that as their way of dealing with it. So I wanted to deal with it in part because it's a question that intrigued me, and in part because I'm taking it somewhere. There's a purpose to what's happening, and it's an ongoing process. Their changing is not something that ends; it actually continues, and that's part of the story arc. It's that ongoing process of them trying to understand who they're becoming.
Right. And you clearly have an idea of what they're changing into. It's about I mean, they start discussing the idea about a third of the way through the first book, so that's into spoiler range, so I won't go into that. But what I'm curious, and maybe this is spoiler as well for future books, do you have in mind a reason how and why it happened, or is that something that's not as relevant as the social impact?
Yes. So it's funny, I originally wrote, I should say this, I originally wrote, the concept originally came to me as a TV series. And I was working with a production company that was working with a guy who'd been the uh, the acquisitions executive at Sci-Fi. And so they managed to get me into a meeting with him. And I had all these elements that related to the story that had to do with it's not in the book, so it's not a spoiler, but the original concept was this spaceship, this generation spaceship had gone off into space, and it was like the hope of humanity, and it was going off, and it had just left the envelope around the solar system, it's the heliosphere, and so they had gone off, and the moments after they'd gone off, it disappeared, and it was this sort of depressing moment of like they lost contact with it, and then a year later to the day, everybody died, and that was the thing. And so this guy and I had this whole thing kind of planned around this, and the guy that I met with, he was like, I don't know what this story's about. What's it about? Is it about a space travel or is it about zombies? What is it? What's going on? You got all this other stuff going on, and it was, it was a very kind of stereotypical Seinfeldian meeting with a TV executive who was like, what are you talking about? So I kind of rolled that back, and then I did. So then I didn't know why they changed. I just knew that it happened, and I had to kind of start to write it before it kind of revealed itself to me, which sounds a little bit mystical, but it did kind of come to me, and then by the time I outlined the book, by the time I sat down to write it, I knew basically what the cause was, insofar as they'll ever know what the cause was, as far as it's revealed in the world of the book. I mean, it may, if I go into book, I'm working on book 3 right now, but if I go into book 4 or something, it will get into more in depth in that. But at the end of book 3, you don't have to know everything in terms of resolving the key plot points.
Right. So I guess two things that come to mind that are sort of stand out from the book, and I'm curious, at what point did they come into the story? I mean, one is obviously the social commentary that comes with it, but does the other one is the age of the zombies, which is in the blurb, so it's not a spoiler, but between 13 and 45. So I'm curious why I can see a reason potentially, but I'm curious why you picked that age. And then did the social commentary kind of follow from that, or was it built in intentionally? Because I mean, zombies do kind of lend themselves to that way if the direction of your story. But
Yeah. Well, the age, to start with that, is that's basically reproductive age. So it was everybody of reproductive age died. Um, and it was just kind of a convenient way to think about it in some ways. Because it was about people being transformed, and it was about certain hormonal changes within the body and certain epigenetic changes that would happen during reproductive age. And so I was playing with that. But then the social aspect was kind of in some ways separate from that and its own thing. I mean, it was partly just because I thought it was a neat idea. I think I'd probably seen the movie version of The Girl with All the Gifts. And I really like the idea of taking it even one step further and making the zombies really the heroes. The Girl with All the Gifts, it's a bit more ambiguous in terms of this new world, because they're running around eating cats, and you know. So I wanted to kind of make it much more clear that the panic was a moral panic based on these people changing. And I think I don't know that I was fully aware at the time exactly what I was thinking of. It only became later that I was kind of thinking a lot about the culture wars kind of stuff and how people react to that on both sides of the culture wars. And I was sort of exploring that and how people grapple with it.
yeah, it was interesting because I was thinking of it from the demographic side of our current cultures, which are aging a lot, and so I was wondering if 45 is an interesting cutoff. Um, I don't actually know the answer to this, but it feels like maybe you're getting like almost the middle of the population there with like the movers and shakers, and so you have this split not only along the age lines but all along the kind of work they're doing, right? Most of the younger people are vibrant in the industry, etc. And
Mhm.
it's almost like they have to bring back the older people to start to back into the industries again. Um, how did you approach that? And did you have did you have fun with it, or was it like a thought exercise? Was it a bit scary thinking how it might react? Because I mean, some crazy stuff happens as well, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly thought about it. It is it's developed more in book two, I think. And book one is very much about the immediate crisis and how it immediately the first days, the first months of the crisis and how it evolves. And book two is more drawn out in terms of, it's still compressed, but it's more like, okay, now here we are in this world. How are they how are they dealing with this? How are they organizing themselves on both sides to deal with this? And so it kind of gets into more the nitty gritty of that, and what it means. Whereas, yeah, the first book, I mean, it deals with it somewhat, but it is more about like, you know, yeah, it's more. I'm trying to say it without giving away too many spoilers, but it is about, people freaking out on one side, for various reasons, and people on the other side being like, "What the hell has happened to us?" And they're freaking out and facing pushback, and people are pushing up against each other and trying to navigate and negotiate this sudden transformation. And people are aligned on both sides. Like people are, just because you've turned into a quote unquote zombie doesn't even mean that you necessarily are like embracing your zombiness, or on the other side that you're not a zombie and you are turning into somebody who's going around to eliminate the zombies and save the human race. It's all kind of mushed up in a sense.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, there's a social commentary because you have the bigotry against the zombies, the prejudice I'm looking for. So you have the prejudice against the zombies, because of fear, driven largely by fear. Um, because of course they're worried about, too many zombie movies. They're worried about getting their brains eaten and stuff.
Yeah.
But you've seemed to have also, so you've taken the idea of the prejudice there and you've kind of mirrored it in a few other ways. So most of your main characters are of minorities, and then you also kind of, I want to say, pick on one religion a little bit. Was that intentional, or is that just what you saw kind of coming to the surface in the U.S. because they do have uh, a lot of very aggressive fundamentalists in certain parts.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, I mean, I think there's two things. One is, America is still predominantly Christian as a society in terms of the vast majority of the population. So that's probably who you're going to come across in terms of that being a story narrative. But I think it's also the case, like Tanisha, who is one of the key characters. In fact, her mom is very Christian, and there's all this kind of stuff about her mom and her father. Her father's an atheist. Her mom is Christian, and how she resists those values, but those are clearly good values that she needs to find her way to. I mean, that's kind of part of the story. And on the other hand, there is the other Christians who are a negative portrayal. They're a cult, and not all Christians are cultists, of course. So it's more about the cult than it is about, like, I don't even know if they mention Jesus Christ or Christianity. It's assumed because they're primarily white people in the Midwest and so on. But it doesn't discuss their actual beliefs at all, because I think that's less important than the fact that it's just an insular community that is built on fear.
Yeah, I'm glad you kind of mentioned Tanisha's relationship with her parents and especially her dad. Without again giving away spoilers, it's an interesting one, and like you said, she kind of has to come to certain realizations herself. I mean, I think she's the first chapter, and it starts in a pretty low point with that relationship. Her understanding seems to at least evolve through a character arc within the story, which was interesting to see. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, it's sort of funny. I realized afterwards, after writing it and releasing it, how much of the story is about the relationship of children to their fathers, which maybe says something about me. I don't know, but uh, But I was like, oh my gosh, everybody is like dealing with father-child relationships, and it's a big part.
Yeah, so I did notice that. Now, especially as I was getting sort of about two-thirds of the way through the book, I was like, I wonder if that's supposed to be another sort of theme in this story. It didn't really seem to have a reason for it, but yeah, they all did have their father issues. It was good to see the evolution of Tanisha's at least, so that it wasn't all in one direction.
Yeah.
Which was good, yeah. One thing that did get on me a little bit, and maybe it was just because of course, when you pick characters, you see the world through their eyes, and so you obviously don't see the totality of the picture, what's going on in society. I felt they were a little bit slow, not just the characters, but I mean, like the government response was a bit slow to try to understand what was happening. Do you feel that, I mean, I don't know if that was intentional or that was just the way the story sort of evolved for you. But I was also wondering, did you think that might be an effect of the way the power dynamic would then be structured based on age? They just assumed straight away, okay, it's a zombie apocalypse, and we just got to clear this up. Because I mean, the zombies, as you say in the blurb, they got up and more or less interacted fine, except they didn't have a heartbeat anymore. So,
Yeah, yeah.
um, so yeah. So how did you view that? Was it just sort of not really on the radar because the other parts of the story were more important, or was it something that just the way it evolved?
Yeah, that was part of it because it wasn't about the story wasn't built around like the official response, let's say World War Z or something like that, you know. It was more about just ordinary people dealing with the effects of this total collapse as it happens. And the collapse as it happens is partly the result of the crisis of everybody of reproductive age dying, and it's partly a result of how people deal with it that deepens the crisis and deepens the collapse. And so it was kind of when I think about how people relate to things, I think I was thinking about how most people aren't political, most people don't even watch the news particularly closely, and so they tend to experience things as far away from them. They experience government as far away, unless they're right there, you know. You know, and so it was about how people were trying to deal with it in the context of probably what would have been an immediately just kind of a big vacuum. And you think about people in LA right now with the fires there.
Mm.
I mean, they're experiencing kind of the same. It's like there's fires and there's no firefighters coming. It's just like you suddenly realize there's a vacuum in terms of institutional presence in your life, and you try to get on with your life as best you can in that context, and maybe complain about it. But in some ways, there's not much you can do. In that case, your house is gone, so there's nowhere even for you to live. These people still have their houses because they didn't burn down, but they're like, okay, well, I'm dead. At least I don't have to buy food. What do I do with my time now? And they deal with it, and you hear them dealing with it like people are fired from their jobs. State that because people are afraid of zombies. Anybody who's in the military, you're not allowed to have a weapon if you're undead. So there's those kinds of things that affect people in a very direct and immediate way. But I didn't get too much into the governmental stuff. That happens a little later on with Danny Morgan, I think. But that kind of comes later.
So there was a few interesting, I guess, themes, and I didn't want to. Well, I don't know how much to go into some of them, but one of them that's really interesting with the particular way you've approached the zombies here, um, is because they're younger. It's primarily the younger, like I say, reproductive age people versus it's like basically the youngies versus the oldies, which I think at some point the characters do allude to. And that feels like it's also let's say a death versus, well, death and rebirth cycle, or stagnation versus change, the old way versus the new way, almost like traditionalism versus I don't know, progressivism maybe. Did you view it that way as well, or did it evolve again naturally because of the age of the characters?
Yeah, I think it was both. I mean, I was for sure thinking about like young people and the challenges that young people face as they not just exactly in the culture war sense, like if we point to particular identities and debates around, say, trans rights or whatever, but just in the sense of as people grow up and they go through a lot of changes, it's often difficult for very legitimate reasons for everybody involved. It's difficult, you know. I have a daughter who's 16, and we get along pretty well, but it's nonetheless it's often difficult for her and for me and my wife because she is becoming a different person. She's literally transforming into a different species, you know? And so it's how people deal with that and the fear that that generates. And so in some ways I've taken that and just kind of imagine this multiplied 1,000 times and what it would mean and what it would do to people on either side. Um, in some ways that's separate. I'm for sure I'm thinking about things like the trans debates and gay rights debates and the other identity-based debates that are taking place in North America and Europe. But it's as much it's about just the act of growing up and just the act of you changing and transforming.
Right. So presumably, I mean, I have a daughter the same age, so yeah, I can definitely relate to that. Um, so this would be, do you see this then as, I mean, again, maybe this is major spoiler because we got several books coming up. Um, as a growing up of the society then, because they are, well, at least the young people appear to be evolving into something else. And they will be the ones that obviously lead society at some point in the not too distant future. So is this then a part of the process of the society evolving then?
Yeah, I think there's a process, a complicated process, or at least it's complicated for me to get a handle on as a writer, of something dying and something new being born, and nobody knows what is dying and what is being born at any given moment, and everybody has different views on it. From the point of view of the older people, it's that we need to start over because we've lost a whole cohort of people, and young children are still alive because they haven't reached puberty yet. What's going to happen? How do we restart things? And for the people who are dead and being reawoke and reanimated, they're also like, what's going to happen to us? Because they don't know either, you know. And I think it's alluded to in book one and in book two. They're like, you know, are we going to turn into zombies? We don't know. Maybe we're going to, you know, right now we're walking around, but maybe it's just a slower process and we're going to wake up tomorrow and we're going to want to eat people's brains.
Right.
So they're, you know, afraid of themselves in a sense.
Yeah. Um, do you have in mind what will happen to the children who um pass puberty then? I don't know. Again, spoiler. So I'm not asking you specifics, but asking you if you have that in mind and have decided on it.
Yes, yes, I do.
Okay. We won't go further into that. One other thing that comes out in the story then is again, don't want this to be too spoilery, but environmental issues. Um, I don't know how much I want to say about that, but is that something you've built in? Because it seems like there could be definitely a direction there, and it seems like it must have been built in.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the early stages of like book one and book two, it's more like a backdrop than a plot. It's almost in some senses like the Blade Runner movies, you know, like it's just kind of you're in this world where in Blade Runner one anyway, it's just like raining all the time. In the book, in Duane Ludwig's Dream of Electric Sheep, it plays a much bigger role because people live off world and there's all that, and it's like if you can go, you go. But in the movie itself, it's just like part of the backdrop is that it's never daytime, it never stops raining, and that kind of thing. And so I didn't want to overburden the book with too much of that kind of, um, you know, whatever. I just wanted to make it part of the backdrop. So there's discussion of it, and it comes up at various points, particularly over the first two books. But it's just kind of there. It's like, oh yeah, the lake is dried up, but they don't really talk about it.
All
So,
right. Because I was thinking, do you think maybe even on conspiracy level, there's someone somewhere in the world who's thinking that that might be a valid way to approach the any environmental climate change issues, etc., is by enacting what's happening in the book. It's a creepy
in
thought.
what
I would hope not.
Like killing everybody?
And or let's say transforming them
Mm.
in a particular way.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, I think it's yeah, I could see that, and I think that again, it comes more in book two, where there's more of Dr. Iglesias, who we meet in book one, but he's appears more in book two. That there are more kind of theories floating around about what happened, and they're looking at it in more detail. In the first book, there's some of that, and we meet him, and he talks about more of the detail of what's happening to them because he's kind of fascinated by it. He's this kind of nerdy character, and he's just like excited by it. Maybe the only person on the planet who finds it all very exciting.
That would be surprising. I would expect that there would be a lot of people, but I imagine he's older. I didn't really understand his age, but he seemed like a more senior researcher. Is that correct?
Yeah. He's like in his late 50s, maybe early 60s even.
Did you envision many of the younger scientists being interested in studying themselves, or would you imagine that they're at this point more freaked out? Because Tanisha, I believe, is a younger researcher, although she was just kind of lost her position at the beginning or something.
Yeah.
Um,
So yeah, I mean, again, in the second book, there's more like in the lab with Iglesias. And so you meet researchers, and there are researchers who are older, who are living, and there are researchers who are dead. And there's some discussion about what that means in terms of workplace politics and how they deal with it.
so the at the time of this publication, the next book should be just around the corner. And then what's your timeline for the third book, do you hope?
I'm hoping that I'll be able to finish it and edit it within like 6 weeks of the release of the book two. We'll see. We'll see.
Wow, that's
I've started it. I've got about 4 chapters written, but my chapters are pretty short. They're like 2,500 to 3,500 words, so it's been a bit slow going to get started. Um,
you hinted earlier on that there might be books beyond the third one. Are you looking to set this up as a series if it goes well?
the 135 books, like that guy.
Yeah.
Lord help me. Uh, no, I mean, I thought that there is a lot that could be explored in the world, and it's my concept of how it ends is not like everything is resolved because there's all kinds of things that I just can't go into because it's just only so many pages. So, I think it'll be a satisfying ending to end it on book three, but it will be ended in such a way that it could continue. If there was interest, I could continue it for sure. There's a whole world to explore.
So we're getting a little bit on, and I wanted to move on to the big questions before we finish up. So I got one big question with three parts, and so it's based around your book, and at least to me, the book speaks in many ways to our collapsing nations, and while there are various national and international groups in our world with their sights on either creating a new world order or shoring up the part of the world they care most about, it's increasingly difficult to imagine what this new world could look like. And especially something that concerns me is what rights the average citizen is going to have in this new world. So, I guess first, what are your feelings on the world as it's going? Are you um, more positive than I am, or maybe more negative, or is cautiously optimistic? Where do you fall on this spectrum of moving towards the future and vision of the future?
Wow. I mean, I do think that we are for sure at a kind of crux point or inflection point. I'm not sure what the exact metaphor that is correct is, but for sure things are changing. The sort of John Mearsheimer, who is a realist theorist. I don't know if you've ever heard him. He did a lot of videos with him talking. He's a very eloquent, clear speaker, an American writer on realist international relations. He looks at how states behave in terms of actualizing their own interests as they are conceived by the ruling elite in the state. And he talks about the unipolar moments from the collapse of the Soviet Union in 91 to the 2010s, maybe, in which America is the preeminent power, that that nobody in any way challenged. And America still largely is. America has 800 foreign military bases or something crazy, and nobody comes close in terms of military dominance, but also things like the reserve currency and so on. But all that is kind of beginning to fragment at the edges. And that is leading to, for sure, all kinds of crazy stuff that we're seeing, whether it's in Ukraine or Palestine, Israel, or the growing conflict with China, who is obviously the immediate direct competitor with the United States economically and technologically, and increasingly militarily. So a lot, that is for sure the moment that we're living in. A guy named Antonio Gramsci in the 1920s talking about Italy and fascism rising and conquering in Italy, said, the old world is dying and the new world can't yet be born. Now is the time of monsters. And I feel like we're living in kind of that moment, in the sense that the old is dying, but nothing new is, and really nothing better is able to take its place. And so we're just living with the kind of monstrosities of these changes happening and creating conflict, but without any alternative.
Yeah, I think it's a good way of putting it. One of the things I tell my daughter is, I unfortunately, unlike my parents, I can't really give you good advice on how to approach the future because I don't know what it's going to be.
Yes,
It's all in chaos right
sorry.
now. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a crazy time. So the second part you kind of very briefly addressed. I'll get you a bit more into it. And the second question was, do you feel we're either at a crossroads, or is this like a real uh collapse scenario, like maybe end of Rome going to the Dark Ages type thing, or do you see us rebounding? Because one of the problems that bothers me often is the apparent demographic shift and the age-related population changes, birth rates falling, things like that. So
Mhm.
how do you see this as a crossroads then, and a way we got to go down before we get back up, or are we just on a way down and we've really got to do something dramatic?
Yeah, holy cow. I don't know. I mean, I think America, a few years ago, I would have said they're in relative decline in the sense that China was catching up. Now I would say that America is in a kind of an absolute decline, uh, and is suffering that for a bunch of reasons, having to do with choices made at the end of the Second World War, having to do with choices made even further back than that. And those chickens are coming home to roost now, and there's no clear solutions that anybody's on offer. I think everybody's kind of dancing around, moving the deck chairs on the Titanic. But I think for America, there's many years of difficulties ahead for the people there. And I think that because America is so big and so powerful, that means difficult years for people in other parts of the world, as well as America attempts to prevent its decline and protect what it has built since World War II in terms of its role as, a global power. I think in other places, I think if we were in China, we would probably be having a very different conversation. There was a study done, actually I read earlier this year, because we talked about China's political system and how that's structured. And what was interesting was they interviewed Americans and they asked them if they thought they lived in a democracy, and only 26% said that they lived in a democracy. And they interviewed Chinese, and we think China's not a democracy; it's a dictatorship. And 80% of the Chinese believe that they live in a democracy.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
But it has to do with how people consider democracy, right? I think that's probably what's going on. We use the word and we think we know what it means, but other people don't necessarily agree with our definition of it. And so for the Chinese, they look around and they go, our government's is, living standards are going up. We have more infrastructure every year. We have better healthcare. We have, my lifespan and my livelihood is, twice as high as my parents was, and theirs was higher than their grandparents before them. Our government represents the people, and, there's all kinds of things also that we don't know about China. The Chinese state is the Communist Party, but there are parties that compete for elections within that state apparatus that are separate from the Communist Party, even though it looks different than the United States. And I wouldn't say it's a democracy, and I wouldn't say the United States is particularly democratic either. But from the point of view of people who live there, I think what determines a lot of times what people think is democratic and what is whether the society is moving forward or moving backwards, and whether they feel like there's means to address the problems that exist. And I think that in America, that's increasingly not the case, which is why people are looking to more extreme solutions, I think. And in China, I think people do feel that they are moving forward, even if they have qualms. And we could analyze China in terms of the actual character of it. The perception of people there is that it is a country moving forward. Now, what that means for the whole world, I'm like you. I tell my daughter, I have no idea where are we going to end up? What is this clash of one rising, one falling? Where's it going to lead? When Rome fell, it led to, half a millennium of darkness. I hope
Yeah.
that's not where we're heading.
Yeah, that brings back another science fiction story, doesn't it? The Foundation series by Asimov.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you did mention the US and China, which are obviously the ones that are on everyone's radar. But we're both living in the geographical Europe, and we're both from Canada. And those are both two geopolitical areas that are definitely going to be affected in the coming years by let's say, the conflict of the superpowers. Um, you still happy to be in Europe for the next while? How do you see that going?
Well, if Trump has his way, there may not be a Canada next year.
Canada, that's true. That's true.
So we may be trading in our citizenships. Yeah, I mean, you're in Britain, I'm in Spain. Spain is kind of, down here in the corner of Europe. We're about as far away from, the conflicts as we can be in some ways. So I'm kind of glad to be here. And in many ways, it has been, for whatever reason, it has been spared a lot of, Canada has socialized healthcare. And that was great being there. But it has suffered a lot of cutbacks. And I remember the process in which they were delisting certain services and making, things more difficult to access and so on. And now, you go to the emergency room and you wait 10 hours to get seen by somebody. And that hasn't hit here in Spain. And I don't know what it's like in Britain, but
It's hitting here, yeah.
yeah, it's not in the same way. Like my youngest daughter has strep throat, and she was in a lot of pain. So my wife took her to the hospital early on Sunday morning, and they waited. They didn't wait at all. They went into the emergency room. They were treated right away. They were there for like 2.5 hours, but it was because they were treated. They had to do the tests. They had to wait for the test results to come back. But they were in constant relationship with service providers, with medical staff the whole time. And then they went to the store and they got the antibiotics, and there's a pharmacare system here. So the antibiotic, which in Canada would cost like $100 or more for amoxicillin, it costs €4.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so it's like I'm happy to be with that.
Yeah, yeah. So you're hedging your bets on Europe over Canada for now.
Yeah,
Trump's
yeah,
Canada. Yeah, that was interesting because what it made me think of with Trump is that he's literally playing the game of risk with the world right now, and he's trying to shore up North America. It's like he's taking his pieces, hedging all his bets on North America, and so he wants to take all the territories on the risk board that fit North America, or even right down to Panama, Greenland. They're all in that territory. It's like he's just got
yeah,
that
totally.
board on his table. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's I don't know if you play poker, but the way he's behaving is a tell, right? Like the fact that he's doing that is a
Mm.
tell that America feels weak and feels like it needs to lash out at even its closest ally. Like you're threatening to annex Canada and like Greenland, which is part of Denmark. Like, what are you thinking? That's crazy, and it's a sign of a sense of weakness that they need to do that.
Yeah, I agree, maybe not quite in the same way, but I do think like he's looking at shoring up US by incorporating the other territories and essentially expanding to the natural extent of what they can expand. I think and it is a sign of weakness and trying to maybe recover from a weakness. We'll see what happens. I guess I guess it'll be curious to see how Canadians respond. They don't typically like the US, so that's something he'll have to overcome, but
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it'll be
I don't
fun.
think anything's going to happen. I think a lot of it is posturing. for China, posturing for negotiations to get like better trade deals and stuff. I don't think he's.
Yeah.
I don't foresee the Marines landing on Lakeshore Boulevard in Toronto.
Yeah, they could land in the prairies, but they'd have a long march to anywhere.
Yeah, yes, like this was easy, but it sucks.
Yeah,
It's so hard to get anywhere.
exactly. So I had the final part of this question, regarding sort of the collapsing society, and again, in your books, you have this, as I've alluded to, the kind of death and rebirth cycle is what it feels like. And so if rebirth is needed in our societies, how do you hope it goes? And then the more depressing part is, how do you think it might actually go?
Wow. Well, I think it's hard to know. I mean, I think we're seeing some of that breakdown happening. I think the conflicts at will begin with conflicts at the tectonic plates between major powers. One of those is Ukraine, which is, of course, it's about Ukraine itself, but it's also about America pushing against the the continent of Russia and wanting to contain Russia, and that's creating that conflict there. What's happening in the Middle East is also about changes. It's about the long-standing situation with the Palestinians for sure, but it's also about the conflict that's happening with rising powers like Iran and with attempts of America to remake the Middle East in terms of a stable relationship with Saudi Arabia and so on. So I think there's stuff happening on at those fissures in the world that is, for me, is a symptom of a deeper problem that's happening in the core as well. And I think that you could see, and I don't know, I don't have a crystal ball, obviously, but I think in the United States, I think we'll see a deepening of the crisis happening there. Trump is not going to, his attempts to use bully models of, and I get it, it's like we're frustrated, and so because we haven't been able to break out of this impasse that is leading to decline, and everything they've tried has blown up in their face. They tried to isolate China by making Huawei illegal, by destroying Huawei, which was one of the largest companies in China, and Huawei came back stronger than before. They now have their own independent chip production, and their phones are better than Western phones and so on. So I think there's a sense in which they feel like they're losing, and so they're resorting to these more extreme measures. And in the meantime, the heart of America is collapsing in terms of infrastructure, in terms of homelessness, in terms of opiate addiction, all of that stuff. I think we'll see more of that before we see less, and that's the sad part, because it means more wars, it means more misery. And it bleeds over into places like Canada. There's certainly more homelessness in Canada than there was when I was a kid. And it bleeds over to some extent into Europe. I mean, Germany has been effectively deindustrialized by the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines and the cheap gas it was getting from Russia, which was one of the foundations of the German economy. So it's going to have an effect. I don't know that it'll be Mad Max, but I think combined with climate change, I think things are going to get pretty messy over the next 20 years for sure. Where would I like to see it go? I would like to see. I think that whatever you want to call it, the left, people power, all that stuff which was very strong up until the mid 1970s in many places, including in Canada. My grandfather was a postal worker, and they were always on strike in the 1970s because it was very strong unions then, and they were able to, his generation, his parents came over from Ireland, and then his generation after World War II were able to improve their conditions and go to, some of them could go to universities, some of them they would own houses, which was new. That kind of came to an end in the mid 70s. And I think if there's a return to that, same as in Britain, right? I mean, Britain also had a very strong labor movement that wasn't just Keir Starmer and kind of photogenic politicians, but was actual working class people taking some charge of their life. I think that would be what I would see as an alternative, because those people don't have an interest in maintaining empires. They have an interest in improving the lives of everybody. That's where I'd hope it would go.
Yeah, yes, that's kind of similar to me. I mean, I almost have given up on the politicians these days, and my hope is that people wake up not for activism and protests and stuff, but to build their neighborhoods around, like you say, around people power, right? And just get on with supporting each other, regardless of what the politicians are going to do, because we're in this very chaotic period now, and they're going to do whatever they're going to do, which is going to affect us, but we're just going to have to live with it mostly. But if we
Yeah, yeah,
support each other and build our neighborhoods from a grassroots level, I think it will help us a lot. Yeah.
yeah. I think that we don't even have a sense of how much we've lost that because we've grown up without it. And I'm not religious at all, and never really have been. But that was a role that the church played. But also, I don't know if you ever watched the Flintstones. It was the joke. He was a member of the Water Buffaloes, the Loyal Order of Water Buffaloes, and they wore their hats and stuff. And that was a real thing. Like people were members of fraternal societies in their communities, and there was a much greater sense of like community collective connectedness. And we've been really dissolved down to like atomic units of
Mm.
consumers. We don't have a sense of that community-based collectivity with our neighbors. We say hello to people on the street maybe, but in terms of helping each other out, in terms of mutual support, and there's a good and a bad side of that. Like people know your business, or maybe you don't want that. But on the other hand, that sense that you're going to be supported. Like I really do think that a lot of like the opioid addiction in Canada and the United States comes down to people having zero connection to their fellow human beings and being like
Yeah.
thoroughly isolated.
Yeah, it's one of the things my wife and I are hoping to do this year is to build closer connections with our neighbors and try to develop something in the neighborhood as well. Yeah. Because it has to
Mm-hmm.
start somewhere, and I think it has to start with the people in a positive way, because our politicians aren't going to do it.
No, no, totally. And it's funny, having kids, you notice it more when your kids get a little older. When they're younger, you organize play dates because you do everything for them, right? And so you're organizing play dates, so you meet other people through that. So there's some connection through your children to other people. But as they get older, your kids don't really want to hang out with you anymore. So you no longer have that connection to other adults, and you have to make that conscious choice. My wife and I had the same, very similar conversation. It's like, I'm going to make an effort to like organize to meet people for coffee, and that, I'm not in my 20s anymore. I don't want to go and party and drink all the time.
Yeah.
I don't drink, but the opportunity to socialize in other settings or do exercise or do crafts, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, that's so true. We were a little bit surprised, perhaps a little bit naive, when our daughter went off to high school. We thought, oh, we'd probably meet some more parents. I mean, we had such, tight connections with some of the parents in primary school, but no, and no one wants, even the parents don't really want to talk to the other parents very much in high school. Whenever your kids get together, let's say they have a sleepover party or something, or whatever, Halloween party, parents just drop them off and take off basically. So
Yeah, yeah, they're like, woo.
yeah, exactly. So it's a little bit, yeah, it's a little bit strange, but yeah, hopefully we'll get our neighborhoods and um get some stuff going at the grassroots level. And I think it's necessary.
Yeah, yeah. And in some ways, and it's more going back to the book, that's partly what, in a actually in a pretty big way, that's what book two is about people doing that and figuring that out. I mean, you see that in book one in maybe the negative sense of the year zero army.
Mm.
Um, but that's kind of what it's in a sense, whether good or bad, it's about people reaching out to create collectivities to actualize their interests and so on. In that
Right.
case, they just doing it with a lot of guns.
Yeah, let's hope we'll be a bit more positive than the year zero army in our
Yeah.
effects. Yeah. Um, so that's maybe hopefully a good note to end on. So it has been great chatting with you. Before you go, perhaps you could remind us of the times of, let's say, the dates, approximate dates of the next two books, um, where to find you online, and if you'll be at any upcoming events.
I have no upcoming events, but online you can find me at my website is shawnwriteshere.com, all one word, or on Twitter where I am occasionally. It's also at Shawn Writes Here, like WRITES. I do have a YouTube page. I do a lot of AI stuff. And I just did so I did a soundtrack for the book on Suno. So I'm on Suno with a soundtrack for Dead's Rise. And I think you could probably look up Dead's Rise as a playlist. Because and I did songs for each of the characters and for different moments in the story. And I wrote the lyrics, and then I used the AI to generate the music, and I gave it the instruments that I wanted it to play and the tempo and that kind of thing. And then I took one of the songs, the title song, Dead's Rise, and I turned it into a music video using AI image and video generation. And then I edited it because I have experience with film, so I did the editing on that. You can find that on my YouTube page.
Excellent. And the dates again for the next two books, approximate?
Oh yeah. So the next book 2 will be released, let's say early February for sure, because it is written and being edited, and there are cover pages have been designed. And book 3 will probably be, say, the end of March, hopefully.
Excellent. Yeah, we didn't talk much about AI, which is something I usually get into. And I did see your animated book cover. Was that done with AI as well?
Yes. Yeah. No, so I did the book cover in Midjourney, or the basic design, and then I know Photoshop, so I had to fix it because Midjourney still distorts body parts and stuff, and her arm was like straight as a stick and long as a giraffe's neck. And so I had to kind of bend it and shrink it and proportion it and then do the typesetting and so on. But then I took it when I was working on the music video, I wanted the video to end with the book, since that's what it's for. But I didn't want it to just be a static image. And so what I did was I had her, because in the book, she's got her arm raised in the air. And then what I did was I had her lower her arm, and then I reversed the video, so that it's her raising her arm, so it ends with her pose that's on the book cover.
Yeah, no, it looks really good. I thought it was really good. Yeah.
Video stuff is really cool.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe I'll have to have you back after I've had a chance to read the next two books, and we can discuss some of the AI stuff as well. But Shawn Whitney, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for listening. Information and links related to this and all episodes are available at alternatefutures.co.uk. I'm also over at Substack under Alternate Futures, where I post articles on science fiction, socio-technological issues, and futurism. You can subscribe for free or sign up for a paid account if you'd like to support the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not share it with friends, writers, and other sci-fi fans you know? And if there are any indie sci-fi creators you'd like to see featured, send me a message at podcast@alternatefutures.co.uk. Once again, I'd like to thank you for listening, and I hope you'll join me on the next episode.
This is the future. Human error. Evolution. This is the future.